The lights on the bridge of the Meridian flickered as another wave of static filled the communication array. Lisa Grant pressed her headphones tighter against her ears and adjusted the frequency for the 100th time that morning. 3 days had passed since they last received any signal from Earth, and the silence was becoming harder to ignore. Captain Jake Morrison stood behind her chair, watching the empty displays with growing concern. The communication officer had been trying to reach home base every hour since they lost contact, but only static answered back. Morrison had commanded deep space missions for 15 years, and he knew that communication blackouts happened, but never this long and never this complete. Ben Carter looked up from his engineering console where dozens of warning lights blinked in yellow and red patterns. The chief engineer had been running diagnostics on their long-range transmitters all morning, but everything seemed to be working perfectly. Their equipment was fine, which meant the problem was somewhere else: the bridge. Door opened and Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster walked in carrying a datapad filled with charts and reports. The xenobiologist had been analyzing the last few transmissions they received from Earth before the silence began. Her face looked pale and tired as she approached the captain. Morrison turned to face her and asked what she had found. Foster hesitated for a moment, then activated the main display screen. A series of fragmented messages appeared showing timestamps from the past 2 weeks. Most were routine supply requests and mission updates, but the final few messages were different. The last coherent transmission had come from Earth Command 7 days ago. It was brief and used emergency protocols that were only supposed to be activated during planetary crises. Foster read the message aloud while the bridge crew listened in growing horror. Project Exodus was complete according to the transmission. Earth had been placed under full quarantine status with no exceptions. All returning ships were ordered to maintain their current positions and await further instructions. The message ended with a single line that made Morrison feel cold inside. His chest. Do not return home. Remember us as we were. Foster scrolled through earlier messages that showed increasing desperation from Earth Command. Reports of some kind of outbreak had been coming in from major cities around the world. The nature of the emergency was never clearly explained, but the responses grew more extreme with each passing day. Lisa Grant suddenly straightened in her chair and held up one hand for silence. Static filled the speakers, but underneath the noise she could hear something else. A weak signal was trying to break through the interference. She worked frantically at her controls, trying to clean up the transmission. The voice that emerged from the speakers was barely recognizable as human. It spoke in flat, emotionless tones that sent chills down the spine of everyone on the bridge. The message was short and repeated 3 times before fading back into static. Earth is silent now. The cure is complete. Do not seek us. Do not remember us. Forget what we were. Morrison ordered Lisa to try to trace the signal source, but she shook her head. The transmission had been too weak and too brief to get a proper lock. Whoever had sent it was either very far away or using very little power. Paul Henderson spoke up from the navigation station where he had been plotting their current course. The navigator had been calculating their position relative to Earth and the nearest human colonies. They were currently 3 months away from Alpha Centauri at maximum speed and 4 months from Earth. First, Officer Kate Williams emerged from the elevator that connected the bridge to the lower decks. She had been checking on the rest of the crew, who were growing worried about the communication blackout. 47 people called the Meridian home, and they all had family and friends back on Earth. Williams approached Morrison and spoke quietly so the rest of the bridge crew could not hear. She had been talking to the department heads, and they were asking difficult questions. Should they continue their current mission or return to Earth to investigate? Should they warn the colonies about what might be happening or maintain silence? Until they knew more, Dr. Ryan Brooks arrived on the bridge carrying his medical scanner and looking concerned. The ship doctor had been running health checks on the entire crew since the communications went dark. He had found nothing wrong, but several crew members were showing signs of stress and anxiety. Brooks reported that morale was declining rapidly. Among the crew, people were having trouble sleeping and concentrating on their duties. Some were talking about family members they might never see again. Others were angry that Earth Command had not provided more information about the crisis. Morrison called for a senior staff meeting in the conference room adjacent to the bridge. As the department heads gathered around the table, he tried to project confidence he did not feel. Their mission had been to explore a system beyond the outer colonies and establish a research station. But everything had changed. Nina Torres, the communications specialist, had been monitoring all frequencies for any signs of human activity. She reported that several other deep space vessels had also gone silent in recent days. Ships that should have been checking in regularly were no longer responding to hails. The pattern was disturbing and suggested that whatever had happened to Earth was spreading to other parts of human space. Morrison looked around the table at his senior staff and realized they might be witnessing the end of human civilization. Amy Foster presented her analysis of the biological data they had received before the blackout. Strange reports had been coming in from research facilities around Earth about changes in human behavior. People were becoming docile and unresponsive but showed no signs of physical illness. The symptoms progressed rapidly according to the reports. Affected individuals would lose interest in creative activities first, then stop forming new memories. Eventually, they would become completely passive and require constant care to perform even basic functions. Morrison made the decision that would define the rest of their journey. They would change course for Alpha Centauri and attempt to warn the colonies about what was happening. If Earth had truly fallen to some unknown threat, then the outer settlements needed to be prepared. As the meeting ended and the staff returned to their duties, Morrison remained in the conference room staring out at the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, Earth was dying or already dead. The Meridian and her crew might be among the last free humans in the galaxy, and the weight of that responsibility felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. 3 weeks had passed since the Meridian changed course toward Alpha Centauri, and the crew had settled into a routine of nervous efficiency. Every department was working overtime to prepare for whatever they might find at the colonies. Jake Morrison spent most of his time on the bridge monitoring their progress and trying to maintain crew morale. The first sign that something was wrong came when Paul Henderson detected a ship adrift in their path. The vessel appeared to be the cargo hauler Phoenix based on its configuration and registry markings. Lisa Grant tried to hail the ship repeatedly but received no response from what should have been a crew of 20. Morrison ordered a full stop and called for Security Chief Danny Clark to prepare a boarding party. Clark selected Marine Sergeant Lucy Martinez and Engineer Specialist Alex Johnson to accompany him on the investigation. All three wore full environmental suits and carried emergency medical supplies in case they found survivors. The airlocks of both ships connected with a soft hiss, and the boarding party entered the Phoenix through its main cargo bay. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls as they made their way toward the bridge. Their suit radios crackled with static, but they could hear each other clearly. Clark reported that the ship appeared to be in perfect working order. All systems were functioning normally, and there were no signs of damage or struggle. The cargo holds were full of supplies bound for the outer colonies, and everything seemed to be exactly where it should be. They found the first crew member in the engineering section. The man was sitting at his workstation staring at a blank monitor, with his hands resting motionless on the keyboard. His eyes were open but completely empty of awareness or recognition. He was breathing normally but did not respond to voice or touch. Martinez checked his vital signs and found them to be stable. The man appeared to be in perfect physical health but showed no reaction to any stimulus. It was as if his mind had simply stopped working while his body continued to function. The boarding party continued their search and found the entire crew in similar conditions. 20 people sat or stood at various locations throughout the ship, like living statues. They would follow simple physical guidance but showed no initiative or awareness of their surroundings. Dr. Ryan Brooks arrived on the Phoenix with his medical equipment and began examining the affected crew members. He found no signs of disease or injury that could explain their condition. Brain scans showed normal activity in areas controlling basic functions, but higher cognitive regions appeared to be dormant. Helen Davis, the ship researcher, joined the investigation team and began analyzing the Phoenix computer logs. She discovered records showing normal operations up until 18 days ago when the final entry was made. After that point, all ship functions had continued automatically, but no. New logs were created. The breakthrough came when Davis found personal recordings made by crew members in the days before they lost consciousness. The videos showed people gradually becoming less responsive and losing interest in activities they had previously enjoyed. They spoke about feeling disconnected from their own thoughts and emotions. Morrison watched the recordings with growing horror as he recognized the same symptoms Amy Foster had described from the Earth reports. Whatever had affected their homeworld was spreading through human space. Faster than anyone had imagined, the decision was made to leave the Phoenix crew in medical stasis aboard the Meridian, while continuing toward Alpha Centauri, Brooks believed. Their condition might be reversible if they could determine the cause, but they needed better facilities than what was available on either ship. 2 days later, they reached the outer edge of the Alpha Centauri system and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The usual stream of communication traffic between colonies and orbital stations had been replaced by automated distress beacons broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Kate Williams coordinated with the navigation team to plot an approach to the main colony on Proxima B. As they drew closer, their sensors began picking up detailed scans of the settlement. The colony appeared intact with all major systems functioning, but there were no signs of human activity. Supply Officer Greg Thompson led a team to the colony surface, while Maintenance Chief Carla Stevens remained aboard to monitor their progress. The landing party found a settlement frozen in time with half-finished meals on tables and children toys scattered in playgrounds. The colonists were found in the same condition as the Phoenix crew. Nearly 3,000 people sat or stood throughout the settlement like living mannequins. They would eat food if it was placed in their mouths and could be guided to perform simple tasks, but showed no awareness of their situation, Thompson discovered. Logs from Colonial Administrator Frank Pierce that documented the final weeks before the colony fell silent. Pierce had been receiving reports of similar incidents from other human settlements throughout the region. The condition seemed to spread through some form of communication rather than physical contact. The logs described how affected individuals would first lose their creativity and imagination. They could still perform learned tasks but could not adapt to new situations or solve unexpected problems. Within days, they would stop forming new memories and eventually become completely passive. Stevens found evidence in the colony computer systems that suggested the cause was some form of signal or transmission. The symptoms appeared shortly after the settlement had received new communication equipment designed to improve contact with Earth and other colonies. Morrison called another staff meeting as the landing teams returned to the Meridian. The situation was far worse than they had initially feared. Every human settlement they could contact was either silent or reported similar conditions affecting their populations. Amy Foster presented her analysis of the pattern they had discovered. The condition appeared to target specifically human neural patterns associated with consciousness, creativity, and emotional depth. It left basic biological functions intact while destroying everything that made humans truly human. Ben Carter had been analyzing the communication equipment found at the colony and discovered traces of an unusual signal embedded in routine transmissions. The signal was incredibly complex and seemed designed to interact with human brain chemistry in very specific ways. Dr. Brooks reported that the affected individuals could be kept alive indefinitely with proper care, but showed no signs of recovery. Their minds appeared to be permanently altered with no known method of reversal. They were alive, but no longer truly human in any meaningful sense. The crew realized they were likely looking at the fate that had befallen Earth and every other human world. Billions of people reduced to empty shells while their bodies continued the basic functions of life. It was a form of extinction that left the victims technically alive but completely destroyed. Morrison faced the most difficult decision of his career as he looked around the table at his senior staff. They represented one of the last groups of unaffected humans in known space. Every choice they made from this point forward would determine whether human consciousness survived or died with them. Nina Torres had been monitoring long-range communications and reported detecting faint signals from the direction of the Veil Nebula. The transmissions were highly encrypted and appeared to be using human communication protocols, but the content was unlike anything in their databases. The meeting ended with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: the Meridian and her crew were now responsible for preserving human consciousness in a galaxy that seemed determined to extinguish it. Their mission had changed from exploration to survival, and they were running out of time. Jake Morrison stood before the assembled crew in the main cargo bay of the Meridian and felt the weight of their stares. 47 people looked back at him with expressions ranging from fear to anger to desperate hope. These might be the last truly human minds left in the galaxy, and he had to find the right words to tell them. The captain began by confirming what many had already suspected. Earth was gone along with every human colony they had been able to contact. The Phoenix crew remained in medical stasis, showing no signs of recovery from their condition. They were alone in a universe that had suddenly become much larger and more hostile. Dr. Wendy Phillips had been counseling crew members individually as the reality of their situation became clear. The ship's psychologist reported that several people were struggling with survivor guilt and the enormous responsibility that had been placed on their shoulders. Others were angry that they had been chosen by circumstance rather than design. Morrison explained that they faced three basic choices. As he saw them, they could attempt to locate other survivors and try to rebuild human civilization somewhere safe. They could establish their own colony and focus on preserving human knowledge and culture for future generations. Or they could investigate the source of the plague and try to find answers or possibly revenge. The crew split immediately into factions based on their preferred course of action. Engineer Specialist Victor Hayes spoke for those who wanted to flee to unexplored regions of space where they might be safe from whatever had destroyed human civilization. He argued that their first duty was to survive and ensure that humans did not become extinct. Marine Captain Beth Coleman stood up to argue for investigation and possible retaliation. She believed they owed it to the billions of dead to at least try to understand what had happened and who was responsible. Running away would mean abandoning any hope of justice or preventing the same fate from befalling other species. Chief Science Officer Barry White had been analyzing all the data they had collected from Earth, the Phoenix, and the colonies. He presented a theory that made everyone in the cargo bay fall silent with horror. The plague was not natural or accidental, but appeared to be deliberately designed as a weapon. White explained that the signal patterns they had discovered were far too complex and specific to be random. Someone or something had created a transmission that could target human neural patterns with surgical precision. It destroyed consciousness and creativity while leaving basic biological functions intact. The implications were staggering and raised questions about who could have created such a weapon and why they would want to lobotomize humanity rather than simply kill them. White suggested that the empty shells left behind might serve some purpose for whoever was responsible. Tactical Officer Rick Green had been working with systems analyst Sharon Moore to trace the source of the mysterious signals they had detected. Their analysis pointed toward a region of space that humans had only recently begun to explore called the Veil Nebula. Several deep space research stations had been established in that area during the months before the plague began. Green reported that those stations had gone silent at approximately the same time Earth stopped communicating. The timing suggested a connection that could not be ignored. Morrison called for order as arguments broke out between crew members supporting different courses of action. The debate continued for hours with valid points being made on all sides. Some argued for caution and preservation while others demanded action and answers. Lisa Grant stood up to share information she had been reluctant to reveal earlier. The communication officer had been monitoring very faint transmissions on frequencies that should not have carried human signals. The messages were heavily encrypted but appeared to be coming from other ships like theirs. The discovery that Other survivors might exist changed the dynamic of the debate significantly. If there were other unaffected humans out there, they might be coordinating some kind of response to the crisis. The Meridian might not be as alone as they had feared. Amy Foster had been studying biological samples from the affected individuals and made a disturbing discovery. The changes to their brain chemistry appeared to be permanent and progressive. Even if the source of the plague was eliminated, the victims would never recover their lost humanity. Dr. Ryan Brooks confirmed Foster's findings and added that the condition seemed designed to be irreversible. Whoever had created the plague wanted to ensure that their victims could never return to their previous state of consciousness. It was a form of death that left the body alive but destroyed the soul. The crew realized they were not just fighting for survival, but for the very essence of what made them human. The plague represented an attack on consciousness, creativity, and free will itself. Victory would not just mean staying alive, but preserving the qualities that made life worth living. Morrison made the decision that would define their future after listening to all arguments and considering their limited options. They would investigate the source of the plague while simultaneously trying to contact other survivors. Knowledge and alliance would give them the best chance of success. The plan was dangerous and might lead to their destruction, but doing nothing guaranteed that human consciousness would die with them. At least by taking action they would have a chance to strike back at whoever was responsible for the genocide of their species. Nina Torres reported success in decrypting some of the mysterious transmissions they had been monitoring. The messages were indeed from other human ships, and they were coordinating a gathering point near the Veil Nebula. A final confrontation was being planned by the survivors. Paul Henderson began calculating a course that would take them to the rendezvous coordinates, while Ben Carter worked to ensure their ship would be ready for whatever they might encounter. The engineering chief reported that their weapons and defensive systems were functional but had never been designed for serious combat. Kate Williams organized the crew into departments and assigned responsibilities for the journey ahead. Everyone would need to contribute their skills and knowledge if they hoped to succeed in what might be humanity's last battle for survival. The meeting ended with Morrison addressing the crew one final time before they committed to their course of action. He reminded them that they carried the hopes and dreams of billions of people who could no longer speak for themselves. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity to strike back. As the crew dispersed to their duties, Morrison remained in the cargo bay looking out at the stars through the observation windows. Somewhere in that darkness was an enemy that had nearly succeeded in destroying human consciousness forever. The Meridian was heading toward a confrontation that would determine whether humanity would survive or join the ranks of the living dead. The weight of inheritance had fallen on 47 people who had never asked for such responsibility. They were ordinary humans thrust into extraordinary circumstances, but they were still human in ways that billions of their fellow beings no longer were. That alone made them the most valuable cargo in the galaxy. The rendezvous point at the edge of the Veil Nebula looked like a graveyard of human ambition when the Meridian arrived. Two other ships hung motionless in space against the backdrop of swirling cosmic gases that formed one of the most beautiful and deadly regions known to human science. Captain Jake Morrison opened communication channels with the other vessels and was relieved to hear familiar human voices responding. The research ship Darwin was commanded by Captain Louis Parker, who had been leading a deep space survey mission when the plague began. The military escort Valiant carried Captain Diane Rogers and what remained of a colonial defense force together. The three ships represented fewer than 200 unaffected humans, but they were no longer alone in their fight. Morrison felt a mixture of hope and dread as he realized this small fleet might be all that stood between human consciousness and total extinction. The first joint meeting of the survivors took place via secure video link between the three ships. Morrison studied the faces of the other captains and saw the same exhaustion and determination that he felt in himself. They had all lost everything, but were still willing to fight. Captain Parker reported that the Darwin had been monitoring the nebula for weeks and had detected artificial structures hidden deep within the gas clouds. The constructs were massive and clearly not of human origin, but they were broadcasting signals on frequencies that matched those associated with the plague. Captain Rogers added that the Valiant had encountered other ships in the region that had been affected by the plague. The crews were still alive but reduced to the same empty state they had found elsewhere. The enemy was using human vessels and personnel for purposes that remained unclear. Chief Researcher Tony Adams from the Darwin had been analyzing the alien signals and believed he was making progress in understanding their basic structure. The transmissions appeared to be some form of advanced communication system, but the content was unlike anything in human databases. Dr. Melanie Foster served as xenolinguist aboard the Valiant and had been working with Adams to decode the alien messages. She reported that the signals seemed to carry both information and some kind of programming, code designed to interact with biological neural networks. The breakthrough came when they captured a transmission between the alien construct and a group of human researchers who had been working at a station in the nebula before the plague began. The humans were clearly affected, but were still functioning as some kind of workforce for their captors. Dr. Walter Kim and Administrator Claire Bennett appeared on the intercepted video feeds as hollow versions of their former selves. They moved and spoke when directed, but showed no recognition of their situation or any memory of their previous lives. They had become living tools for the alien intelligence. Morrison felt sick as he watched fellow humans reduced to the status of programmed machines. The enemy had not simply killed them, but had stolen their very essence while keeping their bodies functional. It was a form of slavery that went beyond anything humans had ever conceived. Tony Adams presented his analysis of what they were facing, based on weeks of observation and signal interception. The aliens called themselves something that roughly translated as shepherds, and they viewed consciousness and creativity as dangerous diseases that needed to be cured. The shepherds had apparently been performing this cleansing process on species across the galaxy for thousands of years. They would identify civilizations that had developed advanced consciousness and creativity, then broadcast signals designed to lobotomize the entire population, while leaving their bodies intact for use as workers. Dr. Foster explained that the aliens seemed to believe they were performing a beneficial service by removing what they saw as chaotic and destructive elements from sapient species. To them, consciousness was a form of mental illness that caused suffering and conflict. The revelation that humanity was just the latest victim in a pattern of galactic genocide changed the nature of their mission entirely. They were not just fighting for human survival, but potentially for every conscious species that might face the same fate in the future. Weapons. Officer Chuck Davis from the Valiant reported that the alien construct was heavily defended by automated systems and energy barriers. Any direct assault would face overwhelming firepower from weapons, technology far in advance of human capabilities. Defense Coordinator Martha Brown had been analyzing the tactical situation and concluded that conventional military approaches would be suicidal. The three ships had limited weapons and no chance of victory in a straight fight against the alien defenses. Engineer Chief Oliver Watson made the discovery that changed everything when he detected massive energy fluctuations coming from the alien construct. The facility was drawing enormous amounts of power from what appeared to be the enslaved minds of multiple species trapped within the structure. Watson realized that the plague signal required incredible amounts of energy to maintain across galactic distances. The shepherds were using the consciousness they had stolen as living batteries to power their genocide machine. Every mind they captured made them stronger and extended their reach. The energy patterns suggested that the system had a critical weakness. If the power source could be disrupted, the plague signal would fail and the entire network might collapse. However, reaching the core of the facility would require getting past defenses designed to protect the most valuable installation in Shepherd space. Morrison called for volunteers for what everyone understood would be a suicide mission. Someone would have to infiltrate the alien construct and manually overload the consciousness extraction systems. The chances of survival were essentially zero, but failure meant the Extinction of consciousness throughout the galaxy. The debate over who should go continued for hours as crew members from all three ships volunteered for the mission. Morrison wanted to lead the assault himself but faced opposition from subordinates, who argued that the fleet needed experienced commanders to coordinate the attack. Kate Williams proposed a lottery system to determine the final assault team from among the volunteers. The random selection would ensure that personal feelings and politics did not influence who would be chosen to sacrifice their lives for the mission. The names drawn from the lottery were Morrison himself, along with Dr. Ryan Brooks, Ben Carter, and Marine Sergeant Lucy Martinez. They would represent leadership, medical expertise, engineering knowledge, and combat skills in the final assault on the alien facility. As the three ships prepared for their desperate attack on the Shepard construct, Morrison looked around at the faces of people who had become more than crewmates. They were the last guardians of human consciousness and possibly the final hope for freedom of thought throughout the galaxy. The alien structure loomed ahead of them in the swirling gases of the nebula, like a geometric cancer feeding on the stolen dreams of countless species. Soon they would either destroy it or join the billions of empty minds that powered its continuing mission of genocide. Morrison felt the weight of every human who had ever lived pressing down on his shoulders as he gave the order to begin their final approach. In the next few hours, they would either save consciousness itself or die trying. For beings who valued thought and creativity above all else, there was really no choice at all. The assault shuttle carrying Jake Morrison and his team separated from the Meridian as the three human ships began their attack on the Shepard construct. Brilliant flashes of weapons fire lit up the nebula as automated defense systems responded to the intrusion with deadly precision. Dr. Ryan Brooks checked their equipment one final time while Ben Carter ran diagnostics on the portable engineering tools they would need to sabotage the alien facility. Marine Sergeant Lucy Martinez maintained watch through the shuttle windows as enemy fire streaked past their small craft. Navigator Julie Sanders guided them through the chaos from her position aboard the Meridian using sensor data to plot a course between the massive energy weapons that could vaporize their shuttle instantly. Her voice remained calm over the radio despite the desperate nature of their situation. The alien construct was even more massive than their long-range scans had suggested. Geometric structures twisted through space for hundreds of kilometers, in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The architecture seemed designed by minds that thought in dimensions humans could barely comprehend. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as they approached the docking bays where captured human ships were berthed like trophies. He recognized several vessels from colonies and research stations that had gone silent over the past months. The crews were probably still alive somewhere inside the facility. Their shuttle attached to an access port that Carter had identified from the engineering schematics they had pieced together through observation. The artificial gravity and atmosphere inside the construct felt wrong in ways that made everyone uncomfortable, but their environmental suits provided protection. The corridors they moved through were filled with beings from dozens of different species, all showing the same empty expression they had seen in affected humans. These creatures had once been the galaxy's greatest artists, scientists, and philosophers, but now they served as mindless workers for their captors. Martinez took point as they navigated toward the facility core using maps that Adams and Foster had constructed from intercepted communications. The Marines' training helped her spot potential threats, but the enslaved beings seemed to ignore intruders who were not directly interfering with their tasks. They discovered the true scope of the Shepard operation when they reached a vast chamber filled with containment pods stretching as far as they could see. Each pod held a conscious being from some species whose mind was being used to power the plague signal that had destroyed human civilization. Brooks scanned several of the pods and found creatures that must have been trapped for centuries based on their physical condition. The Shepards had been harvesting consciousness across the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. Earth had been just another harvest in an ongoing campaign of mental genocide. Carter located the primary power distribution center that controlled the entire consciousness extraction network. The engineering systems were incredibly advanced but followed logical principles that he could understand. More importantly, he could see ways to overload them catastrophically. Communications Officer Ray Thompson maintained contact with the assault team from aboard the Darwin as the space battle continued around the construct. The human ships were taking heavy damage but had managed to disable several of the automated defense systems through concentrated fire. The facility core was protected by the enslaved consciousness of an entire species that had achieved spaceflight millions of years before humans evolved. These ancient beings had been the first to discover the galaxy's potential for conscious thought and had paid the ultimate price for their curiosity. Morrison stared at the massive, crystalline structure that housed billions of trapped minds and felt rage building inside his chest. The shepherds had not just committed genocide, but had perverted the very essence of consciousness by turning it into a weapon against itself. Carter began the delicate work of overloading the power systems, while Brooks tended to Martinez, who had been injured by automated defenses during their approach to the core. The Marine insisted she could still fight, but her condition was clearly deteriorating. The sabotage process was more complex than they had anticipated, and would require someone to remain behind to ensure their cascade failure completed properly. The explosion would consume the entire nebula in a matter of minutes, leaving no time for escape. Morrison made the decision that everyone had expected but hoped would not be necessary. As mission commander, he would stay behind to finish the work, while the others attempted to reach the extraction point. The protest from his team was immediate, but he overruled their objections. The facility began shaking as Carter's sabotage took effect and power fluctuations spread through the consciousness extraction network. Emergency alarms blared in frequencies that seemed designed for minds very different from human brains. Brooks helped carry Martinez toward the shuttle bay while Carter gathered the equipment they would need to complete their escape. Morrison remained at the control center, monitoring the cascade failure and making adjustments to ensure maximum damage to the Shepherd systems. The enslaved beings throughout the facility began showing signs of confusion as the extraction process weakened its hold on their minds. Some seemed to experience brief moments of awareness before the programming reasserted control, but it was a sign that the sabotage was working. Morrison watched through the facility's sensors as the human ships pulled back to a safe distance from the construct. The space battle was ending not through victory or defeat, but because the battlefield itself was about to be consumed by stellar fire. The power core reached critical instability as Morrison made his final adjustments to ensure the explosion would be complete. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet and delivered his last message to the survivors, who would carry on without him. The cascade failure triggered a chain reaction that transformed the alien construct into a miniature star that burned with the fury of billions of liberated minds. The explosion expanded through the nebula, creating new stellar phenomena that would be visible from thousands of light years away. Morrison felt a moment of peace as the energy wave reached his position, and he became part of the cosmic fire that was consuming the Shepherd facility. His sacrifice joined with those of countless other conscious beings who had refused to surrender their thoughts to tyranny. The surviving human ships escaped the destruction, but barely, and found themselves in a galaxy forever changed by what had happened in the Veil Nebula. The plague signal died instantly as its power source was consumed, and across human space empty minds began showing signs of recovery. Julie Sanders plotted a course away from the new nebula that now bore Jake Morrison's name in the stellar charts. Behind them, the beautiful but deadly light served as both memorial and warning to any species that might threaten the freedom of conscious thought. The fewer than 150 survivors faced the enormous task of rebuilding human civilization, while caring for billions of people who had been reduced to empty shells. Many of the affected would never fully recover, but some showed signs of returning awareness. Kate Williams assumed command of the human fleet and made a solemn promise to the memory of those who had died in the final battle. They would find the empty worlds and tend to the hollow people and ensure that consciousness would bloom again among the stars. the last human ships departed the Morrison Nebula, carrying with them the responsibility of guardianship over not just their own species, but any others that might face similar threats. They were no longer just survivors, but protectors of the galaxy's most precious resource. In their final log entries, the survivors recorded their commitment to remember what had been lost and protect what remained. Humanity had departed in silence from most of the galaxy, leaving only ashes and sorrow, but also hope for the future of conscious thought throughout the universe.